Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Inside the Editor's Office, Growing Your Journal's Reputation and Impact. My name is Danielle Padula. I'm the Community Development Coordinator at Scholastica. We're lucky to have a wonderful group of panelists joining us for today's webinar. With us, we have Dan Morgan, Digital Science Publisher at the University of California Press and publisher of Collabra, a new OA mega journal, Clare Hooper, Journals Publishing Manager at University of Liverpool Press, and Pippa Smart, founder of PSP Consulting, where she offers publishing advice and support to journals. Today we'll be discussing strategies journals can adopt to develop their reputation and increase their impact in their field. So thank you to everyone joining us, and without further ado, I'd love to get started. For our first point, I wanted to discuss specific steps that journals can take to develop a strong reputation and to begin to attract more quality submissions. So Pippa, I wanted to start with you. I'm wondering, what steps can journals that don't have a strong, long-standing reputation do to develop their reputation? And especially thinking about journals that might be newer or that might not be affiliated with a publisher or a large scholarly association?
That's a really good question, and something that I'm frequently asked about by editors of different journals, because there's a huge number out there that are not affiliated with learned societies and don't have the strength or the impact or the marketing department that some of the big publishers can provide. There's a lot that a journal can do, but it really comes down to the editor. The editor is the mainstay of a journal. And if they want to build a good reputation, they have to do a lot of work. It's networking, speaking to people, coercing people, getting good stuff into their journal. I was given a trick a few years ago by an editor who said one of the problems in research is that the only people that will send their articles to you are the people who think your journal is the absolute best they can get published in. So all the really good stuff goes to the top journals, goes to the journals that everyone already knows. So how do you, as a smaller journal, less well-known, less established, get that good stuff? And he said a really good way is to not go after the original research from the top authors, but to go after editorials, letters, commentaries, short pieces, case studies. And that way to build up reputation so that you can go around to people and say, hey, this guy has written for our journal. And that gives you a little bit of foothold to get other people, because people follow people. If they see good stuff in your journal, they're much more likely to write for you themselves and much more likely to read the other stuff that you publish in your journal. The other thing, of course, is to make really good use of conferences, of networking events, of meetings, to talk about the journal, get people to write. But you quite often have to start small. You have to start with the non-pure research article, because that good stuff has to go in the top journals. But if you can start getting interesting content, you can start building up your reputation. And, of course, networking, Web2, Twitter feeds, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm not very good with Facebook, but I've been told by people younger than me that it's really good. I don't really understand it. I get Twitter. And to use networking to talk about the journal, to talk about the interesting things you're publishing, and to build up the reputation. And the editors, again, are absolutely the best people placed to do this, because they're in the community. Publishers actually are not the best people to promote journals to other communities. They're great for promoting to librarians, to subscribers, and to hold big conference and events. But researchers trust other researchers. They don't trust publishers as such. And that's why you've got to get that networking moving. And it comes down to the editor, to the editorial board. And although there's a lot of challenges, actually it's a really good people skill to get talking to other authors, get talking to readers, and that's really how you build up reputation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you talk about sort of getting other content from well-known authors trying to look for not the article, but for other items, do you think that as you get that content, the authors will sort of help you to grow the reputation as well? Like as you become a part of that community, it can kind of seed reputation development, because certainly promoting for journals, it's a lot of extra work. Do you think that sort of as you get those good authors, the reputation will start to follow and the promotion will start to follow as well?
Absolutely. I mean, authors don't write for fun. Well, some do, but most research authors don't write for fun. They write because they've got a message they want to get out, and they need the journal to help them get that message to the right group of people. And they write for their reputation, for their ego. And if a journal editor and a journal publisher can help them with that, that's a big thing. Grow Kudos is a perfect example of that, to get to authors and motivate them to start promoting their articles. Some authors are brilliant at that, and if you can get those authors, they can really help the journal whilst they're helping themselves. Some authors are really shy, and you can't push people beyond their comfort zone. But if you can get the authors to promote what they've written and help them to do that, give them the tools to do that, then by default they'll be raising the reputation of the journal as well. So yeah, it works both ways.
Awesome. And I wanted to turn to you, Claire. I wonder, for journals with limited resources, where do you recommend focusing their efforts in order to develop a stronger reputation, in addition to looking for that content from those well-known authors? For example, do you think journals should worry about promotion? Should they focus on indexing, SEO? Does it depend on the journal? What do you think are the biggest challenges that journals need to address to develop their reputations and stay current today?
I think Pippa is absolutely right about editors being really, really key in this point. I would also say that editors having a proactive editorial strategy is really important. Discovery is really important too, but you have to have good content in the first place for people to discover in order to get those citations and those readership up. So you need to create a venue where authors want to be seen, where they see their colleagues, well-regarded sort of stars in the field publishing, and it doesn't really matter about the business model so much of the journal. It really is about the venue. So, for example, our new online access, open access platform, Modern Languages Open, we deliberately asked our section editors to commission well-known authors, people that were respected in their field, so that the first content that we were publishing, the launch content, is something that people, they think, oh, well, this person's published in this journal or this platform, it must be high quality. And I think straight away you're getting that sort of virtuous circle of content leading to readership, leading to citations, leading to submissions, and the better content you publish, the better content is submitted. And I think it really is just one of those things. But also, discoverability is really important, and you do need to work with discoverability companies. So we work with OCLC, Ex Libris, EBSCO, and we send them our metadata so that when people are searching for stuff in Toby Greensword's stuff in our area, they can find it easily. That sort of leads on a little bit to SEO, because a lot of traffic comes to our site from Google. I think that my colleague told me yesterday it was 40% comes to our, well, what is now Atapon site from Google. So you really need to make sure that the research is visible. And you can do that by making it SEO friendly, so search engine optimization friendly, by having keywords, by having abstracts, by making sure that you're using consistent referencing, that you have shorter titles, and that your titles are kind of really descriptive of what is in the article itself. Again, I would agree with Pippa about social media. It's really, really good, especially for people with limited resources. You can promote issues, you can promote table of contents, relevant conferences, events, society members can follow you and find out what's happening. We have, I think, just over 3,000. Yep, 3,000 followers on the LUP Twitter, and it's really about quality with your followers. I mean, there's a lot of spam out there, a lot of information overload, and you really want people to be able to access what information they can with you. I think the final thing would be to choose your partners and intermediaries really carefully. So choose them for their expertise. Invest in technology a little bit if you can. So things like online submission systems or website partners, using people like AccuComms or EBSCO for sales and marketing. So you're really utilizing what they do as a matter of course every day. The relationships are really, really important. Probably finally, again, I would say, well, as Pippa said, utilize your authors, utilize your editors, your reviewers. They're your most important advocates. They're out there meeting people, commissioning, talking, and it's really important that this virtuous circle just carries on growing, I suppose.
Absolutely. No, that's great advice. And definitely, I know metadata was mentioned at the Association of American University Presses last meeting, I believe. Really interesting topic, and certainly something it seems that journals are having to kind of learn how to do. It's complicated to set up a standard process. So I think that's great advice for sure. And Dan, I wanted to turn to you. Can you explain Collabra's unique approach to peer review? You have sort of a pay-it-forward approach to peer review, which is really cool. And as a new journal, what steps are you guys taking to develop your reputation? Especially as a new mega journal, you have sort of like 3 journals to promote right now. That can't be easy.
Exactly, and listening to everybody else, it makes me realize how different our mission is, of course, because as an OA mega journal, we're not really separated by niche or going for kind of the high subjective quality or things like that. But so you asked about the model. I mean, so I'll go through that quickly. So we're an open access supported by article processing charges, APCs, and our APC is kind of quite low. Based on the market, it's $875 US. And the key part of it, the unique part of it, is that only $625 is the APC that actually comes to us as the publisher, which pays for all of our high quality publishing services. $250 of every accepted article goes into what we're calling a research community fund, which holds kind of these funds which are then shared with reviewers and editors who work on the journal. So, a lot of the points I heard earlier are, about the importance of the editors and the reviewer community on any journal. I mean, they are the main part of the prestige and the reputation, no matter what publishers will tell you. So this, Collabra is a first effort to try and tangibly share the value of a journal with the editors and reviewers that work on it. So that it's not actually as they do these reviews. It's not like a fee for service. So I'll quickly explain that too. It's about a given points in the year. The reviewers and editors can choose to pay that which they've earned. They've got 3 options. They can either pay it forward to the journal's waiver fund, which of course supports future authors who are unable to pay. They can actually extract it and pay it forward to their institution's open access budget. So we're making it very clear this isn't about locking in the value to our journal only. I mean, reviewers and editors should be able to pay it forward to their own institutional budgets who will support authors publishing in any open access journal. This is for the benefit of all open access, not just us. And just to prove, really, it's a kind of almost like a trust exercise to prove that it's not about lock-in and it's not our say. This is genuinely the editors and reviewers who decide what to do with the value. We're allowing them to elect to pay themselves. So that's the key point, really. It's not the journal that pays peer reviewers. It's the journal where peer reviewers can elect to pay themselves or pay it forward. So, how will this foster growth? Well, obviously, we're hoping that this will inspire more editors and reviewers to be involved in the journal, not because anyone's going to get rich off of it, but it's more that they will actually have a bigger say in what the journal supports and what the journal's value supports. And obviously, we're going for the low APC, so we're hopeful that, authors and budget holders will be to find this more affordable. And we're hopeful that authors who will see, well, I'm paying this APC, or a fund or an institution is saying we'll pay this APC, but hey, look, this will actually kind of go to the people who actually do the bulk of the work on the journal, as in the reviewers and editors, in addition to the publishers, obviously, do cover our publishing services costs. So it's, you know, it's about, I also heard the word community there. I mean, you know, it's about building a community just a little bit beyond the passive spread of prestige, but to actually have value, you know, to actually have, you know, an institution might actually see value returned from their faculty members working as reviewers and editors on a journal, and we're hopeful that budget holders and libraries will be surprised to see a return from a journal as well as an outgoing line for a journal. So, as I said, to repeat, the main point is to include the most important community, the reviewers and editors and the research community, in the journal, in the kind of the review part. And just, you know, quickly, if we're talking about, you know, how to make the journal the best it can be, you know, we were talking, Pippa was talking about submitting your best work there. Obviously, you know, similar to many other open access mega journals, we will be employing the peer review process, kind of pioneered by PLOS ONE, I suppose, where we're aiming for scientific and methodological and ethical review only. So kind of trying to remove the subjectivity from it. But we're going to try very hard to recast that. I like the phrase that we've kind of come up with, which is selective for credibility. This isn't about like attaining a minimum standard of rigor. This is about being rigorous, but just removing any notion of topicality and sexiness or whatever, or however we can kind of describe subjectivity in kind of the review process. So even though it's going to be large and broad and a mega journal type approach, it's not about subjectivity, but it's still about credibility. And you know, reviewers will be checking for adequately powered studies and enough data to support the arguments and stuff like that. So I really want to remove that notion of peer review light, that kind of awful phrase that kind of pervades this type of peer review. There's nothing light about checking for review and ethical credibility. It should be, in fact, be a very rigorous process indeed. So that's how we're aiming. People will hopefully support the mission, and many people, you know, I'm already hearing and submitting, just want to be involved in the idea that this journal represents. So it's a little bit different to some of the things that have been spoken about already. It's much more of a movement, I suppose, and we're going to see how it goes.
Awesome. And in terms of sort of starting to spur that reputation to get people to know about Collabra, what have you been doing in that respect? Have you guys been focusing on SEO? Are you focusing more on sort of back-end metadata and indexing? Yeah, what have you been doing to kind of get people to know about the journal thus far? It seems to be working, because I know lots of people are talking about it.
I think that, I mean, honestly, the main point has been the simplest point of ensuring that people understand what we're doing. I mean, the second we announced the journal, the headlines were immediately, this is the journal that pays peer reviewers. And, you know, the discussion was, should peer reviewers get paid? This, you know, some people saying this is outrageous, and some people know this is great. So it's as simple as, of course, we find the idea because we live and breathe it. The most important thing in the early days was to ensure that we could tell the story, including via Scholastica in one of your blog posts. You know, the true story that this is much more than getting paid. It's about being, you know, sharing the decision making and the value generation among everybody. We've partnered with Ubiquity Press in London, who are going to power our platform and system. So they're already set up. You know, they've got quite a big network among the kind of the small journal and library publishing community and university press community as well. So we're kind of going to benefit from all of their, just, you know, advancement via collaboration is another one of our catchwords. You know, we're not trying to do everything ourselves. Ubiquity Press have got a lot of services and systems that we can just tap into. You know, they've got all the cross-ref and authenticate services, etc. And, you know, we are going to spend the usual amount of effort on search engine optimization and ensuring that we're discoverable. But, you know, for now, in the very early days of a journal, it's about marketing any which way we can, both the very formal and the very organized, you know, via email lists and, you know, just really spreading the word around like that and on social media, but then just any and all kind of guerrilla marketing tactic we can find. And, you know, we're trying to get involved in our discussions at SSP, and, you know, I'm talking at various conferences, not just about show and tell about the journal, but trying to, you know, change the conversation to, can we get to an effective marketplace in the open access world, you know, where people might, you know, shop around for what services they receive as an author, rather than what they think, you know, is this kind of very amorphous kind of prestige or vibe of a journal. So just things like that, very kind of very engaged with the community, very much about joining a conversation about broader topics, in addition to promoting our brand new journal.
Sure, no, absolutely. And it's a really exciting project for sure. I wanted to also touch more specifically on impact, sort of the big word out there right now, lots of discussions about it. And I wanted to speak both in terms of traditional citation impact and altmetric impact, and how both forms affect a journal's reputation. Claire, I wanted to start with you. When you consider traditional versus altmetric impact, do you think that they both equally inform a journal's reputation and its submissions volume, or do you think one is more important than the other in some ways?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think it's really useful to kind of clarify terms a little bit. So if we're talking about traditional, then we're talking about impact factor and citations and ref impact in the UK, whereas altmetrics might be article level metrics, views, downloads, mentions in social media, news media, how many databases refer to the article. PLOS, I was interested to read PLOS calls it viewed, discussed, saved, cited, recommended, and that's how they kind of classify their altmetrics. I think both are important in different ways. Altmetrics really allows you to see how your research is impacting the field. You can measure it, it's sort of tangible, and I think, again, with a small journal or someone with less resources, it's something that your online content provider can help you with, or partners can help you with. But I do think that traditional still holds weight. We encourage our authors and editors to optimize citations and increase their impact. We give them advice on that, so we might say publish articles on hot topics with well-known authors, make highly cited or highly readable articles free to access on your online content provider. Publish your best research earlier in the year, so there's more chance for people to look at it. And maybe ahead of print. I mean, we've been really experimenting a little bit with, well, we're probably a little bit behind the curve with this. I know that the bigger publishers have been doing this more, but we've got limited resources, and we have made a couple of our journals have online early, so that people can read things when published rather than waiting for the print version. I do think that funders and institutions are increasingly interested in altmetrics. It can be used in funding or promotion applications. I don't think they're a replacement or more important than ref impact or citations, because we still do get the odd query from an author where they say, what's the impact factor on this journal? Does it have an impact factor? Is it included in Thomson? And if we say no, then they say, well, my institution won't allow me to submit then, which is, you know, it's kind of a problem, because the more this happens, the less smaller journals, younger journals trying to build their reputation are able to get on the ladder to get an impact factor, to get cited. Pippa mentioned Kudos before, Grow Kudos. We have been working with Kudos with a couple of other publishers, and they help researchers to explain and share their work for a wider audience, and you can measure that impact via the downloads or the shares on Twitter or the altmetrics for those journals. So you would claim the paper in your system, you'd explain it, enrich it, you could add a layman's abstract or videos or slides or data, and then you share it and you see what happens with that. It's been really interesting, and we really only just started with that, but we're finding a lot of people are signing up, so that's good. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a really difficult question to answer, I think, and I think it does depend on your subject as well. So we are HSS, Humanities and Social Sciences publisher. A science publisher might have a very different answer to that. But yeah, I think both are important in different ways, and I think that altmetrics and article level metrics are really sort of starting to become more interesting for lots of people in a way to measure their impact in a different way to their citations, perhaps.
Sure, absolutely. And Dan, I wanted to ask you, do you think that impact is something journals are and should be worrying about sort of actively cultivating, or should they let that develop organically?
As Claire was already saying, I think it just depends on what type of journal you have. And I think the key thing is to just be really like honest and transparent about what type of journal you have. So whilst I want Collabra to have a high impact, it's one journal spread across a lot of fields. So what will that impact factor actually mean? You might once we have one, I'm going to say once we have one, someone publishing in the social sciences might benefit from this very average seeming impact factor, but someone in the kind of biological sciences might feel it's lower than what they would expect. So in a way, I have to kind of chase impact, but try and make people not focus on that one number. But that's not to say that the impact factor, is never relevant. So I think we just need to take some of the conversation back. I mean, just because a journal doesn't have an impact factor, it doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact factor. You know what I mean? Impact factor trademark published by Thomson Reuters is one thing. But if a journal has published articles, and these articles have been cited, you can recreate that calculation, and as long as you're transparent about saying what you're saying or what you're not saying, and you're not infringing any of like Thomson Reuters impact factor copyright, then surely you can say that. So I could imagine in future me like collecting all the humanities and social sciences articles, doing some analysis perhaps in Scopus or some another database, and saying, well, if I run an impact factor style calculation, then this is what it would have been. I'm not saying it is the impact factor, I'm not treading on anyone's toes. And then authors would have like a clear idea, okay, well, the HSS part of Collabra is kind of equivalent to maybe this or that type of journal. So it's not, I just think we can be a little bit more proactive, both the research community and publishers, in saying, well, this is what I'm saying about this journal, and this is what I'm saying about this journal. And I think, I'll probably have to be quite proactive in that, because, I don't want anybody to not submit to Collabra, in the genomic sciences just because it has a impact factor that seems low to them. I would want to always be able to show, well, if I isolate all these types of articles and just say that this is a mini journal within our larger whole, then that's what the impact would be. So that's what I was going to say about like traditional like impact. And I think we just need to define our own criteria for success up front. And whatever you're aiming for, then check that you can get to that organically. But I mean, impact, it's like being cool. You can identify what being cool is, but if you go through a laundry list of these things that cool people do and try and do it yourself, it can have very dark consequences, as I learned in my teens. So, journals are a bit similar to that, I think. And you can look at an existing journal and notice that it has high impact, but then to try and copy that might be a bit more dangerous than just saying, well, we aim to be a selective journal, or we aim to be a non-selective journal. We aim to have a high volume or low volume, and then just own that. Stand your ground and say, well, we are aiming to be a low volume, highly selective journal. So if someone kind of says, oh, well, you're not publishing very many articles, don't suddenly just change your policy. Say, no, this is our standard that we're aiming for. And and that can work. And I have a little anecdote about how when I feel like a journal stood its ground in a former life of mine when I was at a different publisher. We submitted a clinical psychology journal, and the name of it is not relevant to the story, to Medline, where Medline looks at, for its coverage, it looks at things like evidence of peer review, like all the right ethics statements, that the subject is not already sufficiently covered in Medline stuff, and an international and a good editorial board, evidence of citations, and scholarly work going on. And we were, this was in about year 3 of the journal, and we received the classic, well, you're almost good enough, but please just resubmit in 2 years' time. And we just, we thought about this, and we thought, okay, well, we could do that. But then we just wrote right back and said, well, we already have everybody who's anybody in this niche clinical psychology field. We already have people, submitting and citing our work. We've come out on time. We have all the evidence of peer review. Everything is being peer reviewed. We have all the ethics statements. So as far as we're concerned, we've achieved all these kinds of standards. So we're happy to resubmit, but it will be exactly the same, but just a bit bigger. The journal will have been 2 years older, but we won't have we won't have like 100% different board. And so we just owned it. We said, we've achieved, this journal is successful in every criteria that we've decided to aim for. So let us know whether it's worth resubmitting, because it's not going to be any different in 2 years' time. Now, thankfully, and this might be the key part, there seemed to be an error that Medline had made on the form. So we also pointed that out, and then we got immediately re-reviewed, and then we got in. But I was kind of proud of the editor who really led that charge, and I kind of supported him as the publisher, where we were just like, no, the journal is what it is, and we've achieved everything we set out to do. So if it's not good enough, then that's fine, but it's not going to be any better. So we're not going to change just for this. So whilst that's one story, taken with a pinch of salt, I think it's indicative of let's try and own the standards that we set for ourselves, and not as much as other criteria that people use to judge journals and stuff, like impact factor and stuff. That's fine. I'm not making any comment about that, but we can utilize some of the tools available for us to help us tell the story that we want for our journals.
Sure, absolutely. And that's such a good point, telling the story of your particular journal, because it's true, every journal has different goals, and obviously, depending on the discipline, the impact is going to be different. So yeah, that's a great point. And Pippa, I wonder, you're consulting journals, is impact something that comes up often with your clients? Is that something that you've spoken to them about often? And what are sort of common concerns, and how do you feel about altmetric versus traditional impact?
Yeah, impact comes up as pretty much you get two editors together in a room and they'll start talking about impact factor. It comes up hugely, and because I deal with a lot of journals in the Far East and the Middle East, and some in Latin America, these journals are often excluded from the main indexes, and they don't have an impact factor, and they suffer because of it. It is really tricky. The key thing for any journal to remember is that impact follows content, not the other way around. And if you don't publish good, interesting, perhaps controversial content, you won't get an impact. And it doesn't matter about doing anything clever. I used to work for a publisher who will remain nameless, although it's one on my CV, and we used to provide our editors with a checklist of things that they could do to increase their impact factor. Number one was publish good quality content. But after that, there was a few tricks, tips, and other things. But actually, they don't really work. What really works is publishing good content. My own journal, Learned Publishing, because it's a journal aimed at the professional market, impact factor itself is not as important as it is, for example, at a biomedical journal. What's important for us is that people talk about what we're publishing, and they talk about our articles, and that's the kind of impact we want. We're not going to have a long-term research impact like the pure and applied sciences. So for us, altmetrics, plum analytics, different types of download and discussion statistics are, I believe, more important. However, I can say that because we have an impact factor. So I'm speaking at a position of a journal that's already got an impact factor, which makes it easier for me. Getting into the indexes, though, I mean, Dan's point was well made about the indexes. They can be really tricky to get into. I've been working with one journal, and it's an online-only general biomedical life sciences journal. And they applied to the three main indexes, Medline, Thomson Reuters, and Scopus, to be indexed. One of those came back to them and just rejected them outright, saying you can't be included because you don't do peer review, you don't have an editorial board, and then a few other complaints, all of which they did have on their website clearly visible. But then that index weren't prepared to discuss it at all. And that's just unfair. It's just wrong. But it happened that they must have applied at the wrong time and got the wrong person and got the wrong response. Medline, and I will name them, however, came back, and much as Dan was saying, they came back with the standard response for most journals, which is you're almost there, but you need to do all these things. And a bit like Dan, the editor got in touch with them and said, okay, I fully understand what you're saying, and this, and this, yes, we'll do, but actually this, and this, we already do. but it wasn't clear on their website and it wasn't clear on their system. So in fact, Medline helped them make their own publication clearer about their ethical policies, their editorial board, and their whole systems. So it was very beneficial for them to go through the application procedure with Medline, and I'm delighted to say they were accepted a couple of months ago. But again, it all comes down to impact, and you need to decide what is more valuable for you as a journal. Impact factor is not easy to get for many journals. In humanities, of course, you can't get an impact factor. So you need to be realistic about what you want to achieve with your journal and what actually is more valuable for you. Is it that people talk about your articles, or is it that you need that IF to get authors to submit articles to you? And it's a tricky decision for people.
Sure, absolutely. It's interesting that you have a story also with indexing about being kind of persistent. I think those are such great points. You know, if you get a response and it's unclear to you, sort of exploring it further, because you know, for both of those journals, being able to then you know, determine what needed to be done and kind of sort of solidify their own story. That's a great point, for sure. And to pivot the conversation a little bit, I also wanted to discuss steps that journals should take to prepare to support increased submissions, you know, as you grow your reputation and impact. And also I've heard just as journals move to online submissions, you can sometimes experience sort of a surge in submissions once you are available online as well. So I wonder what steps you guys think journals can take to support increased submissions should that happen. And Pippa, I wanted to ask you, what, if any, steps should journals take to sort of streamline their workflow to ensure that they can support a higher volume of submissions while still having time for promotion and new publishing initiatives? Is there sort of a right time for journals to focus on growth? Because that could become a lot of work if you don't have, you know, a plan in place to kind of handle it all.
No, that's a really good point. I was working with to give another example, a journal that moved online, got an online submission system, went open access, all at the same time, and this was now about 4 or 5 years ago. Within 12 months, they closed down the submission system and they closed down the open access of their journal. And the reason they did that is because they got completely overwhelmed by submissions, most of which were very poor quality. And what they had to do was reevaluate their submission system, reevaluate their author guidelines, and take a much stricter decision-making process about how they would evaluate submissions to avoid wasting the time of reviewers, wasting the time of editorial boards. I should say they now have an online submission system again, and they're back on open access. But it was a very scary process for them to suddenly go from a situation of having, it's a small journal, maybe 1 submission a week, to having 100. And it was a huge volume very, very quickly. And it's like any small business. When a business grows, you get real tensions in staffing levels, skill levels, and the ability to streamline workflows. It's almost impossible to put everything in place before it happens, but you need to be quite reactive. And also within your online submission system, you need to make sure it works and that it's problem-free. And to deal with problems, spend time sorting out problems now than living with them for a long period. And that really is a key thing. Get automated letters, comments, things set up in place, because it's worth investing time up front to save time later down the road. Also, don't be afraid of making decisions. And some editors are quite scared of this, and they feel that every article they receive must go out for review, and that they cannot make a decision without having the advice of reviewers. There was some evidence presented at the Peer Review Congress 2 years ago of a journal that didn't use triage to evaluate an article on submission before it went out for review. And they ran a trial for 12 months whereby they evaluated every article when it came in and made an initial decision, but they still continued to send everything out to the reviewers. And they found that the editorial office agreed with the reviewers something like 85–90% of the time. And that gave them the confidence after that to make initial decisions on articles. And it can be difficult for an editor, particularly in smaller communities where the editor can be accused of bias or prejudice for instantly rejecting an article without sending it to a reviewer or referee. And I appreciate there can be problems there. And one solution for that I've heard is what's called triple blind review. So when the article comes in through the submission system, when it reaches the editor, it's already blinded. So the editor doesn't know the identity of the author. So when the editor makes an initial decision, either to send it to review or to instantly reject it, he or she is making that decision not knowing the identity of the author, so that the author cannot then accuse the editor of bias or prejudice. Apart from that, having a good editorial team on board, good technologies that support you, good editorial team on board, and not being afraid to ask for help. Quite often there'll be good members of the editorial team and also help from the publishers. And publishers, if they're dealing with multiple journals, will have advice and things they've learned from other journals that can be applied to different ones in their list. And it's very valuable to share experiences that way. But dealing with a flood of submissions, again, for my journal, I say this rashly, but I'd love a flood of submissions. I'm probably going to regret saying that, but it is tricky sometimes because they all arrive at the same time and they always arrive at the wrong time. But getting the systems in place is really important, and also trying to minimize the work that you do on a manuscript before you've reached the point at which you seriously want to discuss it and you want to consider it for publication. So cut down time up front to give yourself more time later on to really make sure the article's worth publishing.
Those are all great points, and it's so interesting. I've heard similar stories of journals that, we're just getting sort of a few submissions a week, and then all of a sudden it all starts coming in. So it's true, when it rains it pours. And also it's interesting what you're saying with sort of eliminating work up front. When our recent ebook that we did, Journal Management Best Practices, Tales from the Trenches, Christine Dymick, who works at Kaufman Wells Festing Company, she said that another issue that journals face is technical checks. And sometimes journals will have these really rigorous technical checks in place, and it's actually taking a ton of time up front. And then also you're expecting a lot of authors who maybe aren't going to be accepted. So just sort of the idea of thinking about those upfront costs and how you can kind of spread your time more, effectively is just great points in general. Absolutely. And Claire, I wanted to ask you, how can society and university press journals work with their publishers to make their workload more manageable? Is there anything that University of Liverpool Press is able to do for its journals to kind of help with workload, whether it's just sort of coaching editors or, I know sometimes presses can help with promotion. So I wonder what you would suggest editors seek in terms of their publisher to kind of help them, bear the load.
Absolutely. I mean, it really is a collaboration. So I think an editor's job should be mainly to edit, and I think they spend a lot of time doing other things as well, and possibly they could stuff that they could hand over to their publishers. I mean, we do a lot of conference marketing, and we can provide flyers and promotional materials for journals that can go in delegate packs, so hand all that over to your publisher. There's also kind of the administration side, get them to talk to you about an online submission system that will help you. They can also help you to craft your guide for submissions, like we were saying before, which can make it clearer, and you can be brave. You can, if something's absolutely not suitable, you can just reject it straight away. And your publisher can give you guidance on what other journals maybe in their portfolio doing and how it's helped them. I would say also get your publisher to talk to you about your production needs. So if you are doing too much copy editing, or you find that you're spending absolutely ages editing English that maybe isn't so good, your publisher can do that for you. I mean, don't sort of spend hours correcting bad English. We can do that as a part of our daily role. And we can also help you with gathering statistics and helping you to find out which articles have been most read or which articles have been most highly received, that kind of thing. Providing reports to you. I mean, make sure that you get an annual report from your publisher, and then you can find out how your journal's doing. And that, I mean, that also means that you don't have to do all that. They'll also have a big kind of online presence, so they can promote your work via their Twitter or their Facebook, or they can do e-marketing for you, send out talk alerts, catalogues, if you want to do printed catalogues, kind of a little bit more on the old-fashioned stuff, but e-marketing is really key, I think. The other thing would be they'll also take all of the fulfillment administration away from you. So they would be able to do the renewals and the admin, the distribution, and like literally putting things in envelopes. I mean, a lot of journals spend a lot of time doing that, and I think just hand it all over, hand it all over. They can also help you with depositing DOIs, work with subscription agents, people like Crossref. They can submit your journals to Thomson, people like that, and also abstracting and indexing databases, so they're doing promoting that way. But yeah, I mean, I would have big conversations with your publisher, talk about what they can do for you, because that is, you know, our role to work together, and you need to have good communication with them. And you need to look at what the aims of your collaboration is. You know, are you looking to improve member numbers of your society, or are you looking to get more subscriptions? And they can really help you build a plan of how to go about that. So yeah, just hand loads over.
Good advice. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's true, really, there's so much that publishers can help with. You know, just sort of having those meetings to figure it out is very true. And Dan, I wonder, as a newer journal for Collabra, do you think that setting up your peer review process, the way that you plan to run it, can affect reputation? Is there anything that you guys are doing to sort of avoid those upfront time costs that Pippa and Claire were mentioning a little bit, you know, in terms of kind of streamlining that process from the start?
Absolutely. I mean, I've spoken a lot with PLOS. They're right here in the Bay Area, and one of the pieces of advice that sat with me, like above my desk since, you know, Collabra kind of got off the ground, was they said, no matter how ridiculous it feels, never do anything or set anything up that can't accommodate you getting 30,000 submissions. You know, of course, you know, I'm not expecting anywhere near kind of high levels of submissions, at least for the first, you know, couple of years. But, you know, it has to be in place, as Pippa and Clare were saying. You know, that the growth can happen at any moment. There can suddenly be a flux of papers or some kind of conference where, you know, your journal's a big hit. So definitely get in place like everything that needs to be there before that growth happens. So a couple of tactics we're using, of course, is we have many more editors now than we need for anything that we're going to receive this year, for instance. I mean, Collabra has the benefit of just, you know, sharing that value anyway. So as the journal grows, the ability to kind of share value with the editors and reviewers that work on the shows will grow as well. So we're not really inhibited by kind of budgets in a way that maybe, you know, a subscription journal is, or having to kind of set aside stipends if that's what you're kind of giving to your editors. Mentoring the editors and really kind of helping them with confidence, I think, is super important. We've been very lucky on Collabra in that, you know, we're working with a lot of highly seasoned editors who themselves have, you know, it's a community journal, so it is not me imposing anything on them. It's a group discussion about, you know, coming up with our editorial policies and stating very clearly that editors can use their discretion on whether it needs to go back out for review. You know, an editor herself is an expert. If she decides that the author have addressed the reviewer's points, boom, you know, then that's good enough. So I definitely like the idea of that kind of experiment, you know, if required, to kind of get people to make a kind of write down in pencil, you know, what their decision would have been and kind of equate it to what the reviewer said. That's a good way of instilling confidence, I think. But yeah, if we get kind of editors on board who, you know, are a little bit nervous about that, then I would be very clear on, either myself or in conjunction with our senior editors, making very clear on what they are and are able to do at their discretion and what is mandatory. I think being transparent about your review and editor process is also useful, because in one sense, there's this funny phrase, you can get away with anything as long as you're upfront about what you're doing, right? A journal can run and not send out anything for review, which is fine if that's what they say on their front page. They obviously don't get classed as a peer-reviewed journal, of course, but there's nothing unethical about that. It's only unethical if you say you're going to send stuff out for review and you don't, right? So not that we're going to do anything like that, but what we're going to do is, if you go to Collabra's editorial policies page, it's very clear on kind of the minimum number of reviewers that will be invited, and kind of and we'll get, once we achieve consensus among the editors we're working on it now, we're going to put even more information up there, as to what the decisions specifically mean and then what happens. So, I hope that will be a way that, we can keep kind of queries and concerns down to a minimum by being very clear on what we're going to be doing. I think you're also talking about, like peer review, is the type of peer review, how might that affect your reputation and growth? Obviously, the type of peer review we'll be doing at Collabra is the more methodological style, so our acceptance rates will probably be higher. We've talked to a lot of the existing journals that have this style and, checked ourselves against that, our anticipated rate matches theirs. But, we'll be very clear, and I hopefully perhaps more clear than some open access journals have been about that thing I was talking about before, that this is not some low minimum standard. I mean, these articles have to be still highly rigorous, and the data has to support things, and these will be checked very rigorously. So there's nothing light about that type of review. It'll just be as, subjectivity will be removed from it as much as is humanly possible. And I think, again, one of the other things that we're going to be looking into, obviously once we have content maybe in years 2 and 3, is making sure we show that, it's not just the lowest viable, product of articles that get published in journals like us and PLOS ONE and PeerJ. There are some star articles in there. There are authors submitting their best work to journals that only, judge you on the methodology. So I think all open access journals will need to and will get much, much better about highlighting that kind of content. And we're very lucky at UC Press to be doing this with an existing publisher already in place. Collabra is not a startup company. It's a journal we're launching on the side of an existing publisher. And we're also launching on the side of an existing publisher that has published trade books, right? So we have a marketing department and a publicity department. So we're very lucky that we have the means and the talent here to be able to tell articles' stories, and I think that is hugely useful, especially in the open access world, and especially for a journal like ours, where we really want to showcase that this journal will have excellent and stellar work in it, and it's not just some kind of repository journal, which is how often these journals get regarded.
Sure, absolutely. No, it's so true. I think definitely the idea of looking at the resources that you have and then kind of planning your strategy in place that your resources can support is so huge for journals of any size. So this is really important advice for sure. And we are just about at time, so I wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to join us and to be a part of this webinar today. This has been a great discussion, and I really appreciate everybody taking the time to be a part of it. For those interested in additional publishing resources, I did also want to share that Scholastica has a new free ebook available for journal editors. It's called Academic Journal Management Best Practices, Tales from the Trenches, and we're going to be sharing that link with this video. That ebook explores approaches journal editors are taking to peer review to improve their workflows and make the most of their time. So really relating to a lot of what we talked about today, definitely important concerns for editors to think about. So again, I wanted to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to join us today, and I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in. This has been a great conversation.